Hi everyone, thank you for joining this month's California Brokers Business Accelerator. We have special guest speaker and former president of the CAR Forms Committee, Nikki Coppa, joining us today. Before we begin, I would like to show everyone our AJI University and remind you that you can access all of our systems that we use here at AJI through this page. We have also recently added a live chat. You'll see that at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. So please feel free to reach out to us for an immediate response to any questions you might have. Also, we are proud to announce that our coaching program will be launching nationwide this September. If you would like more information about the coaching program, all you need to do is click on this icon here, and it will ask you to submit your name, email, and which state you're in. So with that being said, I would like to now go ahead and pass it over to our Riverside broker, Mary Jane Morris. Good morning, Mary Jane.
Good morning. Big hello from Riverside County, California, where it's a beautiful, about 72 degrees out, clear skies. A nice California day. I am very excited to bring you today's program. Excuse me, I'm bringing up the screen at the same time. I clicked on it, but nothing's happening, Miss Victoria.
Okay, is the PowerPoint pulled up?
Yeah, that's what I need to do. I thought I had it open. There we go. Okay, thank you for your patience while I learn to use these tools. I'm excited to conduct this interview today. We're going to be talking about COP forms and SPRP, and I had the pleasure of conducting the pre-interview with our guest Nikki Coppa. I also want to get her title correct because I gave it to corporate wrong. She is the 2016 committee chairperson for the Standard Forms Committee at CAR. Welcome, Nikki.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
I'm very excited to have you. The reason I wanted to talk about COP forms and SPRP forms, it's been my focus for about the last 60 days because I get a lot of the same questions over and over again, and many people either fear them or don't know how to use them. So I've been working very diligently in our classes to bring some knowledge and take away the fear of these forms. Again, Nikki, it was the 2016 chair of the Standard Forms Committee. We were both local brokers in San Diego, and she knows her stuff. So before we get into the questions, I do want to tell you that this is not a class where we individually go over those forms. But I did want you to know that this is the link right here that takes you directly to the May 9th webinar that was taught by card attorney Neil Kalin and Janet Gardner. You can also, after this event, email me at this email down below, the Riverside Broker, and I will forward you this entire event. It does go sentence by sentence over the forms, and you can listen to it over and over again or refer to it back whenever you need to. So I want to talk about first thing, Nikki, is the number one question I get on the COP form is, can I continue to market my property? I thought we'd just get that one out of the way and jump right in with that one.
Yes, you can. The way that the form reads is that the seller can continue to market the property for backup offers only. Okay. However, that does become a limitation depending on your MLS rules. Here in San Diego County, I'm a member of Sandicor, and Sandicor MLS will not allow us to keep it in active status. It has to go into contingent status, which none of the agents check down here. And so unfortunately, although they do have the right to continue to market it for backup offers, here in San Diego County, because of that limitation in the MLS, then we really don't have good ability to market it for backup offers.
The local board here, SRCAR, just gave us active under contract, so we have a similar we have a similar situation. I wanted to talk a little bit about when you do have to trigger page, when you do have to trigger that they either need to remove their contingency or continue in the transaction. We talked about a little bit about paragraph 8 and how difficult it is to meet all those goals. I was wondering if we could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the things that is difficult about this form. Here's the thing. A form is written to protect the clients and to protect everybody that's involved in the transaction. However, we have to know that in practice, there's always a risk. If you're doing a move-up sale, there's going to be risks, and there's going to be risks on both sides. And understanding that what this says is that if, in fact, you do trigger 8A, is the immediate right to notify buyer to remove the sale of property contingency. If that one is checked as the default, no box B is checked, then they have 3 days if they receive a written backup offer to use this trigger. If 8B is checked, then it defaults to they have 17 days, the delayed right to notify buyer to remove that contingency. But one of the things that MJ and I talked about was that it's not just removing the sale of property contingency. It actually says you have to remove the contingency, you have to remove the loan contingency, and you have to provide verification of sufficient funds to close escrow without the sale. Most people in this situation, the vast majority, are contingent because they have to be contingent. They don't have proof that they can close without their sale. So unfortunately, if that is triggered, even if you're in a good situation in your transaction, a buyer may be forced to cancel because they simply cannot provide that.
And what do you recommend for those deals you want to stay in? You're just going to have to take what you get to a certain degree as far as they can remove their contingency. Where do you think that leaves us?
Well, it's always up to the client and what they, the way that they want to do this. But the whole thought process about stacking these up is that if I write an offer, I'm a buyer and I write an offer contingent on selling my property, I'm going to start my timelines for my buyer the day before, theoretically, my up leg. So if I do that, then my buyers would have released all their contingencies by that day 17 or day 21, depending on how I've written the offer or accepted the offer. Then their contingencies would be removed. Therefore, their deposit would be in play. So if I then on my up leg were to remove my contingencies and all was to fall apart, theoretically, I use the buyer's deposit that defaulted on me to pay the seller on that one. So the thought process here is that you do have some protections built in. Unfortunately, free will is a great thing, and people will do what they do, and we can't protect everybody through this entire transaction.
Do you find that we discussed in the pre-interview that one of the things that comes up to you is that people may fear a COP transaction or not want to take them?
Absolutely. I see it a lot where listing agents that aren't familiar with the process and aren't familiar with the form will often look at a contingency as a weaker offer. And although I definitely say, obviously you have to be depending on somebody you don't even know, and there's more people in the mix. I've really been a listing agent my entire career, and the thing I love about contingent offers is that you don't usually have a buyer that gets cold feet. They need to move. So it actually gives me a little bit more security. Yes, I have to worry about their buyer, but at the end of the day, I usually have a much stronger, much more committed, and much more stable buyer for my listing when I look at a contingent offer.
That's similar advice that I give when a 1031 tax-deferred exchange is used and my agent calls me in fear. I tell them these are highly motivated people that are looking to avoid taxes and that sort of thing. So I appreciated your thought that these are motivated parties. This is not a less motivated buyer. This is a more motivated buyer, which brought me to the interesting discussion you and I had about how important the move-up market is in in California.
Absolutely. It's something that it is what stimulates sales. I mean, when we are working to stimulate the move-up market, think about it. Every client, instead of having one transaction with them, you're having 2 transactions with them. And this is what we saw with the huge escalation of transactions back in the day in 2003, 4, 5, is we got into that move-up market. And right now, what we're seeing is that a lot of clients are afraid of the move-up market because there's too much risk and it's too much work. And so as agents, we really need to work to help explain to them what protections are there, and then we just need to be more accommodating. Most sellers that I work with that accept a contingent offer, I've already explained to them, here are the ups and downs of the whole thing. So yes, there will be times where things are not going perfect, but guess what? They want to buy your home. We'll work through it. Understand that there's going to be speed bumps along the way, but just know that we'll work through it and we'll adjust accordingly. As long as expectations are set properly, because you will have a speed bump. You will not go through a move-up sale without speed bumps. But you can get through them, and most of the time when you have motivation on the part of the principals, you can get through anything.
Right, which actually brings me to my next point. You and I discussed managing expectations. Many of you know I'm a retired escrow officer, and I discovered through my practice that when I had concurrent transactions, that if I told everybody right from the very beginning that one of you will be in the other one's way at the end, and you have no idea which one of you it is or why, and that you will need to be accommodating, you'll need to be careful about moving trucks, you need to be careful about that. I have happy, willing people at the end. When we don't manage expectations as far as that moving truck is pulling up tomorrow morning and the first leg isn't closed, that's when I have to step in and solve a lot of problems. So managing expectations in general in our business, but specifically for buyers and sellers who are renting new houses perhaps, or leaving a rental, or whatever the situation is, we need to be, or having a moving truck, or what day the power is going to be turned off, that kind of thing. We need to manage those expectations. It's pretty important. Do we have we change our forms a couple times a year. Do we have June changes for the COP form coming?
No, not for the COP. All the changes in June, actually the vast majority of the changes in June center around the listing agreements. The arbitration clause will be removed from the listing agreements. And so that's your vacant land purchase agreement or listing agreement, all the different listing agreements. So that's the vast majority of the changes that are pushing the last week of June. But those are up on the website, and there are red line versions available. I know I sent them over to you, MJ. So if you want to see what is changing, then you can see that, and those will push out the last week of June.
It's kind of a bonus topic here, but I want to talk about the, since you brought it up, the arbitration clause coming out of all the listing agreements. Could, just a minute or two, can you talk about how that developed?
Actually, that came out of, at the CAR meetings, then we have closed meetings for the Standard Forms Advisory Committee where we discuss comments, but we also have the Forum on Forms where any and all members are welcome to come and comment or ask questions about any of the forms. And a comment from the floor was that most of the brokers, the vast majority of the brokers in the state of California have their own attorneys, and they don't want the arbitration clause signed by their agents when they take the listing. They'd rather their attorney deal with something. And what we're running into is that agents would just initial it anyway because they thought, hey, here's a blank line, I'll initial it. And so it ended up being a big training issue. And so we went back, and this was the first we'd heard of it as the committee, that everybody wanted it out. And so we polled the brokers, and we had over 80% that wanted it removed. And at the end of the day, these are our forms, and if that's what works best for the people, then that's what we do. So we went about taking it out of all of the listing agreements, because again, that's between the broker and the seller. And if the broker doesn't want arbitration the vast majority of the time, then why should it be in there and just have to be overlooked? This way, you will have the option. There will be a line in there that says that you can add the arbitration agreement, which is a standalone form in the CAR library. So if, in fact, your broker says, yeah, I absolutely want that signed, then he'll teach you to always add that to your listing agreements. But at the end of the day, the whole point is to make these work best for us out in the field.
That's awesome. I found that whole topic when you and I were doing our pre-interview very interesting how it came about. You would, people who don't operate as brokers might be thinking that arbitration is always, or mediation arbitration is always the best choice. And it is between seller and buyer, because very often you get them in the room and they'll sit down and work it out. Not so much for listing agreements, and so it was an interesting topic, and I'm glad we had a chance to cover that. I also wanted to mention to the crowd, and I forgot to mention that you can type in your question, and our moderator who's watching it I'll get back to questions at the end. We'll have a chance for those. I would like to move on now to the comment questions for the seller purchase of a replacement property, which is the seller's version of this form. Nikki, what are your best tips on this form?
You know, this one, actually, one of the things I hear the most, MJ, is that, oh, I didn't know there were two. Because once upon a time, for those of you that have been around for a while, we used to have one contingency, and the top part was for the buyer and the bottom part was for the seller. Well, as lawsuits get filed and all that good stuff happens, we need more language protecting us, and so they were split into two forms. The COP is when the buyer has a contingency. The SPRP is when the seller has a contingency. And one of the awesome things about this, if you represent a lot of sellers, you know that the sellers never get contingencies, and they never have an opportunity to back out. This is a form that actually gives them that. They have the ability to say, all right, on this form, I need to find the replacement property, and there are two contingencies there. If you look in paragraph 1, the first one is finding the replacement property, and the second one, if you check it, is close of that replacement property. So the seller, in fact, if that box is checked, has two contingencies. That's one of the things that's overlooked a lot, is checking that second box and giving that seller that second contingency. And what I run into in this is, you know, the first time I used this form, my client didn't care about, it used to say concurrent close, and the Forms Committee changed that because my client didn't care about it being concurrent, so I didn't check the box. Well, we found our replacement property, we put it in escrow, then we did our physical inspection and found out the foundation was cracked. Well, we'd already removed our finding replacement property contingency, so now my seller was locked in with a property that they couldn't buy. So I figured out that you always want to check that box to give you some wiggle room in case something comes up with that replacement property, because not only do I need to find it, identify it, and get that offer accepted, I need to be able to close on it as well. So checking that box just gives a safety net for that seller.
One of my agents mentioned to me that this might dissuade a buyer who thinks that they have to, if you can't commit, how are they going to stay in? I think it's a little different now with the seller's market, because if you want a particular home and you've managed to survive the locating it, the offering, and the acceptance, you should probably be keeping your options open as far as specifically what has to happen ahead of it to close. Do you have any thoughts on that, a buyer's fear of us?
Absolutely. You know, a buyer right now has to understand that that seller can pull out at any minute before closing. And to have a seller that has a contingency that rides the entire transaction, yeah, that's going to give you a little heartburn. But right now in this market, buyers are going to need to swallow that. If, in fact, the market changes where the sellers don't have as much power, then you're going to just need to be a little bit more creative. On that finding replacement property contingency, you may write that I have 17 days to find it and remove this contingency, but you need to be telling your seller, okay, look, we need to find it in 5, so that we can do our inspection, make sure that you're happy with this home, and be able to remove that contingency in 17, because the buyer may not allow for 1B to be checked with the close of replacement property. Again, when you move the power from one side to the other from a seller's perspective or a buyer's perspective, then we may have to make adjustments. And so that's what I think will happen with that when the sellers don't quite have so much power.
Yes, very, and one big difference, as she mentioned already, is it offers the seller a very rare right to cancel, which is very interesting. Do we have any June changes coming on this form?
No, not on this one. The other thing that is confusing on this one, though, too, is time periods. When we look at the two forms, the COP is for the buyer, and the time periods default to starting right away, and you have to check a box to delay the start of time frames. On this form, the seller's contingency form, the time frames default to not starting right away, and you have to check a box to start them right away. Because the theory is that I'm saying as the seller, okay, Mr. Buyer, I accept your offer, but we're going to put things on pause until I know that I have something else. You don't have to start spending money yet. You don't have to start doing inspections yet. Wait till I find something. Then we'll start the contract with all of our time periods in it. And so the defaults are different for the time periods.
I've discovered recently that many people don't realize you can reset an acceptance date. Obviously, when we are all focused on performing on time, we don't think about the fact that if there was a delay or some very good reason why one person or the other was cost some time, you can very simply reset the time frames or credit a day or two by addendum. So I just had this come up in the last week again, and I was discussing it in a local class, and many people didn't realize that you could reset dates, and especially in a COP transaction, that may be very useful, so that everybody can feel like there's still a performance, and that the dates, because there could be a possibility that the dates sort of, I don't want to say disappear, but run out and then they're not reset. So resetting time frames, saying how much time is left, that sort of thing can all be done by addendum, and acceptance dates can be moved by mutual agreement when there's a good cause for one side or the other.
Absolutely.
I want to move on and talk about your committee work in general, but before I do, Victoria, do I have any questions about either one of these forms?
Not right now, Mary Jane, no.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to talk about committee. I was, you know, I guess I'm a lifetime learner myself, and I just renewed my went and took my contract class again just to make sure there wasn't any new wording that I wasn't familiar with, and that sort of thing. And I guess I always knew these forms came from somewhere, but I was really fascinated, especially since I already knew Nikki, to talk about the Forms Committee itself. Nikki, I believe you told me how many realtors we have in California is about...
The 198,000 is how many realtors we have right now in California.
And how many people serve on the board, on the committee?
On this particular committee, it's by special presidential appointment, and there are 17 realtors that sit on the committee. We have 3 attorneys in the room, and we have a staff person. And so that's what comprises the committee.
I was interested to hear that for a couple of years you were the sole representative for the entire San Diego County. Is that correct?
Absolutely, and that's one of the catch-22s about the committee, is that with only 17 people on it, it is difficult and it's tough to make sure that you're representing every area throughout the state, because quite honestly, the forms are used very differently in different parts of the state, and they have necessary things in different parts of the state. So you really do need that representation. And so a part of me in the beginning thought, wow, we really need more people. But the workload of this committee, if we had more people in the room, we'd never get anything done. And because we really go through every single question and comment that comes in and we discuss it. And if we have, I mean, right now we have 17 opinions in the room. And if you look at that and you think about that in the concept of here's one question on one form and 17 people talk about it, okay, that would be, let's say, 17 minutes. Well, when we meet, we have a 4-hour meeting and we have about 140 comments. And so we simply could not get through anything if we had more people.
Yeah, that's amazing. When you gave me those numbers, I was even more impressed. How'd you get interested in the Standard Forms Committee?
You know, when I first started, then I wanted to understand the contract, and I had a great teacher that said, I want you to read one paragraph a night and then come and explain it to me. Because what I found is that more and more people, they try to read the whole contract, and they're really not getting every single nuance within the contract. And so I became a real student of the contract very early in my career. And when I found out that this is where the committee hears all the different comments, and when I refer to comments, we get questions or comments about the forms that come in from a variety of sources. At any time, any CAR member can email carforms@car.org with any question or comment on any form. Okay, so any member can do that. Then we get the legal hotline. When people call into the legal hotline, if the attorneys go, wow, that is an issue, they send it up to the Forms Committee of something that, hey, we didn't see this is happening in practice, you might want to make a change. We also consult with a panel of attorneys that tell us all the litigation that's happening throughout the state, and if we need to make changes to the forms to protect our members, that's where those come in as well. So that's why each time we meet 3 times a year, and we get about 140 comments each time we do it.
What's the process like as you review? What's the standard process look like?
You know, it's funny because I didn't realize how much work it was to be chair until I was chair. And so as the chair, I would get all the comments in advance from my staff liaison, and I would pull everything in and I would sort them. Okay, all of these are about the RPA. And then I'd read each one. Oftentimes we had duplicates. So, you know, this one is kind of like this one. You know, this one is exactly like this one, because oftentimes we have similar questions, so that I could narrow it down so that we could go through them as quickly as possible. I determined in the room who we have questions on leasing documents. Again, we only have 17 people in the room, so I found out who are my people that actually are working in property management, because, you know, if all you're doing is regular real estate sales, then really I don't need you weighing in on the property management form. You're just reading it, because the whole concept is we've got great attorneys that put this stuff together, but we're the ones dealing with it in practice. So the best thing on paper may not work in practice, and that's what we have to look at, is that, well, when we're doing it, this is what's coming up. So let's change it, because then in practice it's just more practical.
I have found in my career that when I find a form doesn't work for me, I stop using it, and I think that's the loudest voice that you can give to a form besides emailing, is that, you know, it just can't be part of my transaction, and so unless it's required, I have kicked forms that I did not think were valuable or were setting me back in the transaction. One of the obvious points we should make here that we haven't made so far is how important it is to read our documents before we use them. Very often I'm simply as a broker, redirecting an agent back to a particular paragraph. So I think a paragraph by paragraph study guide is a good way to go. Nikki, we have a precedent in this particular webinar, because we also interview our best agents. Is there a weakness on the committee that you can talk to me about?
You know, the toughest thing is the amount of work that comes into this committee. We want people to comment on the forms. It's kind of a quiet committee because, like I said, they lock us away in a room to do our work. And we do want people to comment on the forms. But oftentimes, a lot of the comments are simply, you didn't read it. And we don't reply to each person, but we discuss each thing. And I got to tell you, out of the comments, I would say probably 35% of what we go through are tagged, it has its own column, education issue, okay? And there's nothing wrong with the form, the person just didn't read it. And so, yes, getting the word out to get the education, I think you hit on something very important, Mary Jane. With all of the work that you do, with all of the study that you do, you still go to classes. I do too. When the attorneys come in and give an RPA class, I sit through it because this document changes when the market changes. It changes when people change. It is always going to be evolving, and different parts of it are going to become more important. If we talked about 5 years ago, the COP and the SPRP weren't in play. You know, they weren't something we were worried about because we weren't in that kind of market. But now it needs to be in your repertoire. So yes, continuing education and continuing to read it. I still, when I teach this class on the RPA, I learn something every time I teach. I go, wow, I didn't realize it said that. Because when different things are happening, then it will mean different things. So continuing education is an important part, and I think that that's probably not necessarily about the committee, but we deal with a lot of that, and if some of that could be weeded out, that'd be nice.
I also, in all my classes, hold up the sample forms book from CAR that's available, as well as the contract book, which of course I can't put my finger on the second so that I can read the title of it, but I've showed it in many classes, and the contract discussion book does go paragraph by paragraph and indicate what they meant. I use this book mostly to explain to agents who are opposite of our transaction, to prove to them where they went wrong. Taking my word for it alone isn't necessarily helpful in some transactions, and when I use something directly from CAR, it is very useful. Any final thoughts for us, Nikki, before we close?
You know, actually just take the time to read the documents, and if you have questions, talk it through with somebody, because these are very, very powerful, and it's going to make you a better agent, and it's going to do better for your client if you know these documents. So take the time to learn, and don't be afraid to ask, because the only dumb question is the one that you don't ask.
Well, Nikki, I've always been very impressed by you. I think we have a real shot of hearing you as a CAR president someday, and I hope that you'll continue your good work, and I'm grateful that you were able to take the time for us today. Just one last check to see if we got any questions, Victoria?
No, Mary Jane, we don't have any.
All right, well, I guess that wraps it up. Nikki, once again, we're very grateful to have you, and I'm lucky to call you a friend as well. And again, I want to remind you guys that I posted the link at the beginning about where that class is that you can listen to all over again. It goes line by line by the COP and the SPRP, and I hope everyone has enjoyed this look at not only these forms, but what that committee accomplishes every day on your behalf. And I will kick it back to Victoria.
Perfect. Well, we just want to give a huge thank you to Nikki for joining us today. We're getting some great feedback right now. Thank you for taking the time to join in on the webinar.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, Mary Jane, for hosting today's Brokers Business Accelerator. We hope everyone has a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.